Hey, what's going on everyone? Nick here with my review for The Mandalorian Chapter 7, The Reckoning. So there will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the episode, you have been warned, and if you don't want to get spoiled, go check out the episode, then come back and we can discuss. So this episode is definitely a return to form for the series and probably something that fans have been waiting for ever since Chapter 3. When you ask a lot of people, they feel like Chapters 1 to 3 really told a story that had, progression with it, you had characters being introduced. That was when Baby Yoda was first introduced, and then you had the conflict of the Mandalorian, whether he was going to give him up to the Imperials or if he was going to keep the child, what was going to happen there, and then basically episodes 4 through 6 have been what you might call filler. They're essentially side quests or side plots with the Mandalorian and the child going around the galaxy, making some extra cash and trying to stay out of trouble for the most part. But episode 7 and seemingly what will be episode 8 are definitely circling back to the storyline that was set up in chapters 1 through 3. In this chapter we see the return of Greef Karga, played by Carl Weathers. Basically he pleads to the Mandalorian to return to Navarro because ever since he wreaked havoc with the Guild and the Imperials and double-crossed them, things have not been the same since, and the Imperials have been really upping their security and basically taking over the entire town. And what's in it for the Mando is that if he's able to kill the client and get rid of the Imperials, Greef will clear his name with the Bounty Hunters Guild, so the child will finally be able to just roam freely throughout the galaxy without having, the fear or threat of a bounty hunter trying to claim their prize around the corner. So Mando eventually does relent and go back to Navarro, but not before getting some help along the way from previous characters. First up, he goes back to the planet Sorgan, where Cara Dune has been hiding out, and he recruits her, but he also goes back to the planet where he left Quill because he needs his help in watching over the child. This episode also does reveal a lot of new stuff with the child. We actually get to see him use some more force powers, one of which is probably going to be pretty big because it adds something new to the canon where he uses his force healing abilities on Greef after he suffers a life-threatening injury, and he also uses force choke on Cara Dune when she's arm wrestling with the Mandalorian because he thinks that Mando is in danger. This episode also finally introduces Giancarlo Esposito's character Moff Gideon and his squad of death troopers. Basically, when things go south with the client, when they come back to Navarro, that's when the Moff shows up and the death troopers kill the client and shoot up the entire building, leaving them stranded in there, basically cornered with nowhere else to go. At the same time, while those characters are being pinned down, Quill has Baby Yoda and he's trying to get back to the Razor Crest to escape the planet before the Imperials can get to it. But everything goes south when a couple of scout troopers pick up on their radio communications and chase down Quill. And that's where we get to the big cliffhanger for this episode. Like I mentioned, this one's definitely feeling like a two-parter between episodes 7 and 8, so next week we're going to get the climactic ending to the season and find out what happens to our characters after they're being pinned down by what looks to be a squad of death troopers and a bunch of regular stormtroopers and the Moff Gideon himself. One thing that I was not really expecting, and I'm sure a lot of people were not expecting in general, was that this episode saw the death of Quill. Quill is unable to make it to the Razor Crest by the time the scout troopers catch up to him and they steal the child. So going into chapter 8, we have tons of stakes on the table and we have to just figure out how the Mando is going to get out of the situation. One thing that I forgot to mention was that earlier in the episode when they go recruit Quill, it turns out that after the Mando left that planet, Quill went back to the mercenary camp and recovered the body of IG-11 and reprogrammed him to be somewhat of a butler and servant type droid, which I thought was pretty funny because we get a montage of him having to train the droid from scratch and helping him learn all of his abilities over again. So like I said, this is definitely one of the best episodes of the season because we're finally getting back to what made the show great, and that was having a centralized plot, some character development, character progression, and also a very worthy adversary in Moff Gideon. I think think a lot of people were expecting his character to show up sooner because we did see him in the first trailers, but I'm glad that we're getting him because right away, he only gets about a minute of screen time this episode, but he makes a lasting impression because he's super intimidating and you feel very threatened by his character. Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. What did you guys think of this episode? And what were your thoughts on some of the big reveals, like the fact that Baby Yoda has force healing powers and has force choke, the death of Quill, and Moff Gideon's entrance? For all things Star Wars and the latest in pop culture, be sure to subscribe to HN Entertainment.